The geopolitical environment is one that, we are not going to be able to influence or control. So it's how do you work within that? Which are the industries that you want to focus on that are going to be successful, that are going to be hiring, that are, going to be growing? So really looking at the landscape and, assessing where do I want to put my chips. No firm has a moat where they could say, like a pharmaceutical company, where okay, we have a patent for 20 years, and if you even come close, we'll see you in court. So there's no moat, and so it's culture and that data-driven management that I think are the big differentiators.
Hi, friends, and welcome to this episode of Now Hiring, the podcast about talent, staffing, and recruiting, brought to you by the good people at Siepel. I'm your host, Andy Weiss, Chief Marketing Officer at Siepel. This is a bonus episode of Now Hiring, recorded recently at Siepel Connect, where I was joined on stage by Mark Roberts from TechServe Alliance. Together, we delve into the current state of the staffing industry. We cover technology, the economy, AI, and operations. So without further ado, let's dive into the session. Hello and welcome, everyone. I am Andy Weiss, Chief Marketing Officer here at Siepel, and thank you all for joining us today at Siepel Connect. I'm joined by Mark Roberts, CEO of TechServe Alliance. If you're not aware, TechServe is the premier organization dedicated to the IT and staffing engineering and solutions industry. And Mark and I have had this conversation a couple times over the last several months, and each time it's been dynamic. And Mark, I think we've kind of uncovered at every turn some nuance, some shift that today I think it's going to be as fresh and as exciting as every other time we've had this.
Andy, I thought we solved all of the challenges out there in our discussions, or at least in our minds we did. But I really always look forward to the conversation with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us and joining me again today. So the last time we sat down and talked about this, the words choppy, uncertain, stagnant kind of came up. And some of this was in direct correlation to TechServe's annual study. And so we were kind of doing some extracts from that. But to kind of ground our conversation today, what's changed? What's changed in the staffing landscape?
Yeah, so I think what's changed, I think we've seen mild improvement in many quarters and some more optimism. But, uncertainty still abounds. And I think really what's happened is there's been a shift in the key factors that have contributed to the uncertainty. So I think through certainly much of 2024, tail end of 2023, there was the fear of the economic downturn, the recession that fortunately never came. So that was, I think, first and foremost in folks' mind. Then there was the overhang of the election and of course, geopolitical tensions and complications. And now, of course, I think, pretty much everyone feels comfortable. We've moved past the threat of recession and the economic downturn. We've moved past the election. But there's, continued uncertainty in the overall business environment, and some of that has to do with the shift of administrations. I know we'll talk about has kind of caused some shifts in policy, and I think businesses are struggling in terms of trying to predict what will be the policy. Things like tariffs, immigration policy, things along those lines.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna put the elephant out there, or the 800-pound gorilla out there, and we're going to address it head on. And here's, as we talked in preparation for today, I think you offered an important insight, and I'd like you to kind of reprise it. And I think it's one where, politics can be polarizing. Presidents and administrations come and go. And the fact in the matter of the business that we're in is we need to chart a pathway through that. And so I think, you gave some good counsel in terms of how do we navigate this kind of the geopolitical kind of climate, and what kind of guidance have you been giving your membership that you can kind of surface to this audience today?
Yeah, I think first it's staying informed through attending sessions like this, and some of the information we put out and your organization puts out, Andy, and staying informed, and then recognizing those elements that you can change and those elements that you can't, but responding. Businesses, at bottom, they're all in the business of solving problems, of overcoming hurdles and challenges. Certainly, successful businesses are.
Mm-hmm.
The geopolitical environment is one that we are not going to be able to influence or control. So it's how do you work within that? And I think it's certainly to make sure that you've got you do scenario planning.
Mm-hmm.
Step back. Many in our industry have a habit of working incredibly hard on the day to day in client relations, consultant relations, obviously motivating the team. But I do think it's always important to step back and have strategic discussions with the leadership, maybe even bring in some outside, thought leaders to do some scenario planning. What will happen if our key clients pull back or accelerate? What will happen if the adoption of AI is accelerated within a given industry that has implications, obviously, for those that supply them talent,
Mm-hmm.
both for good and for ill. These things are never usually, one-sided. They have many dimensions to them.
Yeah. So for anyone that has their bingo card and is playing along at home, Mark was the first one that mentioned the word AI. So please put your chip on that square, and I'm going to
Yeah.
use the door that Mark just opened around AI, because one of the themes that we've been talking about a little bit today is AI, but also AI in conjunction with the human side of it. So I think, Mark, as you think about AI, I mean, we're not going to get away from it. It's going to and is a continuing to be a major force that's shaping staffing, whether we like it or not. So in your conversations with your members and stuff, how are you seeing some firms starting to kind of use it in a successful fashion, or playing around with it? Are there any kind of insights that you can extract from your base?
Yeah, so just talking to folks, I think we really are at that experimentation phase for most folks. It's just, I mean, if you just think of how ChatGPT has not been around for that long, and really sort of this broad, even though AI and machine learning have been around, of course, for a long time, it's really entered sort of the popular culture, I think, within the last couple of years in a big way. But kind of talking with them, a lot of folks are experimenting. Allowing a recruiter that may not be super strong in terms of their written communication skills, being able to redraft their email communications to candidates. Obviously, its use in marketing, it has tremendous potential for really creating leverage in terms of a marketing effort. But folks are really trying to figure out, where to spend both their time and their money on AI, and it's early days. I think we have to recognize that, and trying to figure out, where are the efficiencies I can capture now, and where do I need to be investing for the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I also think it's important not to make it too bright and shiny, and treat it more like any other tool, any other system, process, et cetera, that you have in your business. You've got your financial system that you're using to be it QuickBooks or something else that you're using to kind of manage the financial side of your business. You've got other kind of ATS, VMS, workforce, CRM systems that you're using to manage things. But then you also have printers and phones and other things that are fundamental. And so trying not to put too much weight on it. Yes, it kind of transcends all of those, but I think a healthy attitude is not to put too much stock into it, but to balance it and look at it across those lines.
I think that's great advice, because I think if you make it too big, then I think it chills decision making. You're like,
Mm-hmm.
where should I put all my chips? And I think you're right. I think it's a tool, particularly at this stage. And feel free to experiment with it, fail in terms of things that don't work well. It is not the answer for everything, but really empower your team to use it in different
Mm-hmm.
ways. We recently our team had a strategic retreat, and it's like, well, how are we going to continue to evolve in terms of our utilization of AI? How are we going to train our team in terms of use cases? How do we communicate it to others in terms of what
Mm-hmm.
works well, what doesn't work? And so really thinking about it strategically, but to your point, don't be afraid, jump in. There's, obviously any number of different platforms and ways to use it. And of course, folks, such as Sequel are, working it into their, into their product line. It is going to be
Mm-hmm.
used ultimately, in our industry to create greater efficiencies, I think, particularly on the recruiting side.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you've also kind of opened up a little bit of the door on kind of the operational efficiency side of the house. I think, you touched on it a little bit with the retreat that you had with your own team as an organization, but also thinking about it just in terms of, time, effort, and resources. As we think about the market and the changes that we're all kind of facing from that standpoint, where are you seeing firms spending most of their time and or potentially wasting time and resources that could be better served in other areas as they're trying to kind of navigate their way through whatever's happening in to their business at this particular moment?
Yeah, I guess I go back to the recruiting piece. That seems to have the greatest opportunity to create some efficiencies, and automations and things of that nature. I don't know if I've heard much in terms of lack of success, because it's all about experimenting. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think folks have reached a verdict on anything. And of course, these tools are continuing to improve, continually. And so they're not static. So what may not work great today may be totally different a month from now. It's
Mm-hmm.
moving that fast. But I really do see the recruiting side of things as presenting the opportunity for greater efficiencies, to taking out a lot of those tasks that have been performed by recruiters, and allowing them to be more candidate facing,
Mm-hmm.
where they really provide value.
Got it. The so as we look as a firm looks at their book of business, and maybe we talked a little bit about uncertainty, some challenges, kind of maybe some areas are feeling a little stagnant. Maybe they've got opportunities, but the candidate pools are drying up. Like we had earlier, we had a conversation around healthcare, and I know you don't directly deal in the healthcare space, but one of the challenges that they surfaced was we've got opportunities coming in, but then there's this, there's a talent gap. We don't have enough people to fill those roles, and so they're having to manage that. And I think in IT and engineering, there are also different pockets of that as well. And so as you're thinking about that, and any kind of thoughts or guidance that you would have to firms in terms of how they're looking at their portfolio, and kind of being able to weather some of those ebbs and flows.
Yeah, no, it's always interesting. It's never, the supply demand, kind of seesaw is never perfectly in balance, right? I mean, you'll have, lots of demand and short supply, and then, it'll shift. And we've seen, I've been through many industry cycles, and certainly see that. Um, yeah, it's really staying attuned. So, we through our event, we partner with CIOs, for example, with an organization of CIOs. Listen to the technologies that are evolving. So to try to plan, maybe even pipeline, candidates in hot skill sets. So you're totally right. Even though IT has been, growth was anemic last year, and we're certainly not seeing a hockey stick type of recovery. There are absolutely pockets around
Hmm.
AI, cyber, things of that nature that healthcare IT that remain very, very strong, where there is a dearth of candidates. Um,
Hmm.
then, and that's kind of in the short term, and in the long term, and we, had a phenomenal speaker at our event talking about the demographic challenge we have ahead, and his takeaway, which was just phenomenal, is technology is actually going to save us from this absolute labor crisis that we are
Hmm.
confronting. And you and I don't have to guess it. I often say, economists 3 months out, is a flip of a coin. Demographers, those who specialize in talking about the working age population, they are incredibly accurate 20, 25 years out, because they know how many babies were born on a certain day and how many of those will work into the work, it will make it into the workforce. And we know there is a labor, basically a labor crisis coming. And so we're not going to have enough workers. And that includes, obviously, technology has always been an area that has been, underpopulated in terms of domestic talent. So,
Yeah. No, it
it's
was,
coming. Yeah.
yeah, and it that was a phenomenal session. For those that were not at TechServe, I will find a link to this professor's information.
Yeah.
We'll give you information to look up some of his writing and stuff. Very, very interesting, very eye-opening. Mark, I have continued to quote
Yeah.
um, that keynote in multiple conversations, even outside of this space.
Yeah.
So it's really phenomenal. But for those in the audience today, some of the things that Mark's talking about are not just U.S. centric or domestic challenges, but these are global things where this individual and other demographers have looked across populations across the globe, and to Mark's point, these birth rates aren't changing day to day. There are more
Yeah.
longitudinal
Actually going
trends
down. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
declining, and so it's creating challenges and opportunities for those in our space. And This individual had a really cool hypothesis or thesis for AI and technology being able to save us and stuff. So really, we'll drop that
Yeah. I think
in
it's
the show
worthwhile.
notes.
Definitely
Um,
worthwhile. I totally, really eye opening for me as well.
so in addition, like delving into that a little bit further, like if you were to, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Mark, but if you
Sure.
were to
Yeah.
start your own staffing firm today,
Yeah.
knowing what you know,
Yeah.
how would you go about building that and structuring that staffing firm?
Yeah. Well, first, a couple of things. First, I would, ask the question, how am I going to differentiate myself in a crowded
Hmm.
marketplace? And probably I would not start just, come one, come all kind of,
Hmm.
putting myself out. But what's my specialty? Is it an industry? Is it a skill set? What's something special I bring to the table? And then playing off of what we talked about, I would be, super invested in technology and seeing, especially, the problem that, folks have if they currently have certain tech stack. They're, change happens, but it's a process. But if you're starting anew, you can really evaluate and try to leverage sort of the latest technologies to create efficiencies, operational efficiencies. So those are some of the things I would do. And then, the key is, what is your go-to-market strategy? What do you bring that's special, to
Hmm.
a client? There are a lot of, IT engineering staffing firms out there. So what differentiates it? Do you have strong relationships? That, would certainly be something that you would want to take stock of. And we see new firms pop up all the time, folks who are typically veterans of the industry, and maybe they work for someone else, and they have certain relationships, or maybe they work for a larger staffing firm, and they open up their own operation. So those are some of the things that I would look at.
Hmm.
What differentiates you in the market?
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about seeing organizations continuing to come into the space, which is really positive, and I think it's an indicator of continued optimism and growth.
Yes.
Are you seeing things happening on the reverse end of the spectrum where firms are exiting or it's consolidation? What's the temperature on that end?
Yeah. So we actually have a M&A. We help facilitate M&A in our industry. So you always do see exits, and a lot of that tends to be, where you are in your career, from a career life cycle perspective. And so we always do see folks exiting because they're ready
Yeah.
to exit. So you do see that. And the other thing that we are seeing is, because at least for the last year plus, organic growth has been hard. We're actually seeing some increase in terms of the interest of inorganic growth, even among medium and smaller firms, just because it's really hard to open new logos, to certainly open a new market,
Hmm.
if you don't have a presence there. To hire an effective sales team, that's a continual challenge in our industry, to hire effective salespeople. So if you can potentially acquire it makes it certainly
Hmm.
easy. And so we are seeing folks who exit because they're at that point in their career, and then we are seeing new folks come into the space.
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying this episode. And if you like what we're doing here at Now Hiring, I invite you to check out our newsletter, also called Now Hiring. You can find registration for that at seipel.com. And now back to our episode. One question that came up from the audience, and I'm just going to read it to you. So, what role do emerging technologies, for example, AI, agent AI automation, play in reshaping staffing operations, and how can organizations stay ahead of the curve in that realm?
Yeah, great question. I mean, one of the challenges here is, the word emerging is very appropriate. It's and so these new products, new services, new add-ons to existing products, they're coming at a breakneck speed, and
Hmm.
so it's kind of hard to have a simple answer, but it's to make sure you stay attuned to educate. So webinars. We put one on with we'll put experts on, in terms of the evolving different technologies. The problem is there's many out there, and so you have
Hmm.
to have some strategy to even evaluate them. Because most people don't have the ability to, basically, evaluate potential new products and technologies all day. I mean, they
Hmm.
have kind of a day job, which is, servicing clients and consultants. And so I do think, look for sources of information. Talk to others. We're big about the community of sharing. So we have, like, for example, executive roundtables, and the executives share insights. Hey, this worked, this didn't work. This, you should really check this out. So that's often a very good way of at least narrowing the field in terms of some
Hmm.
things to look at. So
So,
I don't. Yeah, go ahead.
do you, so when you're in your community, are you seeing kind of still an interest in like people leaning into these emerging technologies and kind of wanting to learn and understand, or is there, the other end of it is, okay, I've had enough of this. It's overhyped. And, as you're thinking about your own programming and content for TechServe, it's like, okay, we can over-index on the educating people around the emerging stuff, but then we need to balance it with the human side. And so
Right.
are you seeing that kind of play out in your community? And if so, what does it look like, and how are you navigating that?
Andy, I don't think there's one simple answer because obviously different folks have different
Yeah.
perspectives. I think there may be some sense that elements are overhyped in the short term, but perhaps underhyped in the long term in terms of the
Hmm.
disruptive impact of it. And so that's kind of my take on it. So I think some of these tools are nice to haves and they're creating some efficiencies, but they're not game changers yet. They're not fundamentally altering the landscape yet. So that's how I think. But I think folks are leaning in, but again, given limited bandwidth, you have to kind of balance it against the day to day. And to your point, this is still fundamentally a people business.
Yeah.
It's funny. This is not the first new technology, as you could appreciate. I mean, obviously your product was, at one point, ATSs had not evolved to anything like what they are these
Hmm.
days. I remember, sort of dating myself when the job boards were going to be this great disintermediator. Why would anyone need a staffing firm if you have a job board? Because the client will just go to
Yeah.
the job board. It was a great accelerator of the industry. Our industry moved from literally classified ads to job boards and then systems integrators. And then, obviously technologies like LinkedIn and, so it's really interesting how, new technologies, they get adopted by the industry. Are there always winners and losers as those shifts
Yeah.
happen? There always are. And that's why I think, the stuff you do here in terms of educating folks, the key is, I think, to stay attuned and talk to people, attend formal things like this, but also just talk to people, just have conversations.
Hmm. Agreed. And I think it's the challenge for me is, wearing the marketing hat as well, is how do we ensure that we're not overhyping every new thing,
Right.
because then it starts to kind of, it gets drowned out, because it's, a little bit of the boy who cried wolf, in that
Right.
it's, this is new. No, this is newer. No, it's the newest. And it's got a diminishing kind of return on it, which is unfortunate, but it's all
You,
super exciting.
you know what I analogize it to, Andy, is breaking news. I mean, everything is breaking news these days, and it's kind of the same thing. If everything is breaking news, then when it's really breaking, you don't pay attention as much. And so I couldn't agree more with you, which is, and it's hard because I think a lot
From
of companies feel the obligation to have AI worked into at least the marketing material and hopefully the product. It's if you don't invoke it, then where you're offering old technology if you're not invoking it. But I couldn't agree more
Yeah.
that uh, I think it would be being more discriminating and really highlighting true innovations, true things that take things a product to the next level, as opposed to smaller
Yeah.
smaller
Yeah.
changes.
There's a little organizational FOMO, I think, that goes on,
Yeah.
that if we're not out there saying something, um, that we're not advancing, because we missed out on this week's cycle, this week's
Yeah.
breaking news cycle. So
Exactly.
um,
Exactly.
there, from time to time, to kind of ground myself, there's I go back in the Wayback Machine. There's I'm completely dating myself now. There's an AT&T AT&T commercial that came out. There was the voiceover was by Tom Selleck. So the old Magnum PI for folks, great voice. And it's the long version of it is like probably a 2-minute TV commercial ad spot. And basically what he does in this AT&T commercial is he's sharing all the technology that came out of Bell Labs that was the precursor to the commercial version of AT&T. And so he's going through and talking about how one day soon you will be able to start a TV program on your television and then continue watching it while you will be on your commute. And you'll be able to, start a video. You won't have to fly across the country or around the world to meet with somebody. You'll be able to do it, virtually and have a session where you have multiple people in different locations participating in a conference or a meeting. And then it concludes with, and you'll be able to send a fax from the beach.
A fax.
And a fax. Yes, this is breaking technology, but it's the little things that, and this was, the late 90s when this came out, and it was like a lot of aha things, but I go back and watch it and it's things that, we're doing half of that, you and I today.
Right.
And, for me, it kind of helps ground myself in the get out of the breaking news cycle, get back to the fundamentals, back to the question that came from the audience about emerging technologies, understand it, break it down, figure out how it works,
right?
But ultimately stay true to the fundamentals of your business. How are you making money? Where are your clients and customers? What sectors are they in? Understanding, the human side of that equation, because at the end of the day, the technology is just going to help you maybe be able to do some of that better, faster, smarter. But without the relationships, we're all out of business.
I couldn't agree more, Andy. And I like a lot of what you said in terms of go back to the fundamentals. So it's always, certainly in our industry, about the people. It's always about the people, whether it's your internal team, the consultants, or the clients. And then the business fundamentals. Technology, as to your point, is an accelerator. It's can create operational efficiency, but business fundamentals are business fundamentals. And what is your differentiator in a crowded marketplace? Are you a volume shop, playing in the VMS MSP space, or are you more direct client relationship?
Mm-hmm.
How have you structured your team accordingly? And it has implications for margins and profitability and all of those things related to the business. So I agree with you. Don't lose sight of as I think you referenced, the bright, shiny object. It can be very distracting, but stay true to the business fundamentals and then continue to look, how can I create greater efficiencies? Where is my ROI on a particular investment? It's not only investment in dollars, it's investment in time and mind share. We can only focus on so many things well. We all like to think we're great multitaskers, but that's usually for things that are important and complicated. That's usually not the case. So where are you going to focus your time, your energy, and your dollars for maximum ROI? And then I think you have to have both, a short, medium, and long-term perspective. So there are investments you may need to make for the medium and long term, and then, but you also have to stay in the near term, to keep the business operations and to pay for all of those things that you want to do in the future.
Mm-hmm. And I think agreed. And I think it struck me as you were talking about this. There's a lot of truisms that have surfaced in what you were sharing, and I was thinking about our audience today and your membership and how you get to talk to a lot of different people, a lot of different firms and stuff. And I'm wondering, as you think about the leaders in these organizations, are there common traits, common characteristics, or there ways of thinking that you find as in talking to these folks that have emerged over time that, hey, this set of characteristics, these types of organizations, because of the leadership that these individuals provide their organizations, they tend to be more successful. These, on the other hand, tend to be to struggle or face more challenges, if you will. So, are there kind of clusters of those or common themes?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's always fascinating about the industry is I describe the industry. It's a big pyramid, not unlike a lot of industries. And if you think about it, no one really has any IP. I mean, maybe get some of the margins with solutions, but in staffing there is no IP. So basically, every staffing firm has the same tools at a given point in their life cycle. And why are some firms maybe don't make it past 10 million, and then we have billion-dollar firms in our sector?
Yeah.
What's the difference? And
Yeah.
I can really sum it up. It comes down to kind of what you alluded to. It comes down to leadership and management. And so those firms are more strategic. A big differentiator we see too is reliance on data-driven management. So are you kind of a seat of the pants? And don't get me wrong, I think there is a place for intuition and instinct. But fundamentally, you see the sophisticated firms, and often the firms that grow, and certainly all of the large firms, are incredibly data driven in terms of how they manage the business, in terms of all of the key metrics. And so I see that as a big differentiator. And then the last thing I would say, which is the exact opposite, right, left brain, is culture. Is culture. The famous quote, culture, each strategy every day. And that is so true in our industry. Again, there's no IP. We don't have, no firm has a moat where they could say, like a pharmaceutical company where, okay, we have a patent for 20 years, and if you even come close, we'll see you in court. So there's no moat. And so it's culture and that data-driven management that I think are the big differentiators.
No, that's some great insights there. And I think, if you're, head of a staffing firm listening today, I think, doubling down on your culture and understand and the data side of it, like taking a look at those things. It's easy to get caught up in the AI stuff. AI can help you understand some of the data in your business, but that culture piece, that's going to be, a significant portion of your growth and kind of a pathway there. So great insights, Mark. Thank you. So as I'm, sitting here with you today, and I'm kind of, because we've had this conversation multiple times, I'm thinking, okay, inevitably, you and I are going to have this conversation sometime in the next several months, I'm assuming.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you to pull out your crystal ball, shine it up, and you can pick the time horizon. Okay. But it at least needs to be, more than, I'm going to say that, 3 months is probably too short. Okay.
Right.
But at least 6 months or further out, you can pick the time horizon from there. What are you and I talking about? What are some of the adjectives? What are the things that, are starting to kind of percolate at that time that maybe some folks here need to, start thinking about, or as they're doing their strategic roadmaps and plans, to pay attention to?
Yeah, well, I think within that time frame, the big change to me is what's happening on the policy front.
Hmm.
And so some of these proposed changes, uh, are they all enacted or are they rolled back? Whether through the administration themselves rolling it back or through the courts, so what does that look like? Because I do
Hmm.
think, and has it settled down from an ability to has some of the uncertainty been removed? And so that
Yeah.
I think is a question, and regardless of where it lands, and not weighing in on one side or the
Yeah.
other, but where does does the business community, because the clients of our members, are the ones who are deciding, do I green light this project? Do I put it
Hmm.
on hold? Um, what's my, capex, for this year? Do I
Hmm.
pull it back? And all of those decisions, are often influenced heavily by, the perspective of the macroeconomic environment and obviously for the specific industry. And
Hmm.
so the thing I'll be looking for is whether a lot of that has settled down in terms of we know what the playing field is looking like, and clients of our members have a better sense of what they're dealing with. So
Yeah.
you could just look at things like the auto industry. The auto industry understanding what the landscape looks like will go a long way towards I think encouraging them to continue to invest uh,
Yeah.
in uh, in technology.
Well, and I think there's a lot of it, geopolitically, there's a lot of interconnectedness, so regardless of where your focus of business is, regardless of where your clients are, in this world, everything's interrelated in some form or fashion. And so I think, taking this shorter term time horizon and kind of watching and understanding how things kind of shake out is super important. But then also thinking about, you know, there's another election cycle in the US in midterm elections in 2026, and then 2028 there'll be, another major
Yes.
election, and kind of what, not taking it out of the political side of it, but thinking about it from an organizational standpoint. And what do you want your firm to do, be, act like, look like in 2020, at the end of 2026, and then again in 2028? And
Uh,
how do you connect the dots between here,
right.
now, in March of 25? How do I get there? What are the kind of external macro influences? But then there's
Right.
a decent amount of things that are, within our control. Mark, I got you to start your own firm. You're navigating now from 2026 and 2028. I'm assuming you want to be successful and growing in
Right.
28. So you're charting that path, and it kind of helps maybe lift out of, all the heavy AI conversation, or better, maybe informs some of
Yeah.
that, and some of the other kind of newsworthy or headline making kind of political and geopolitical things. So
Yeah. Wow. I'm glad you lobbed the easy question towards the end. But first, I'm very bullish. I mean, I think we sit at the intersection of, talent and technology. I mean, it's a
Mhm.
great place to be. But it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier, really mapping out your clients and, which are the industries that you want to focus on that are going to be successful, that are going to be hiring, that are, going to be growing. So really looking at the landscape. And assessing where do I want to put my chips. Obviously, I do think certainly 2026, 2028, I'm really looking at technology and how it
Mhm.
can accelerate my business. And then, continuing to do those things that we know are differentiators, managing by data, making sure I have data, benchmark against the industry. Where can I improve? That concept of continuous improvement. How can I continue to improve? Because these are fairly narrow margin businesses, and being
Mhm.
attuned to how I can maximize, my business, both in growth and profitability, are critical for the future.
Awesome. Well, Mark, as Build, I think we crushed another phenomenal conversation around this topic, and I'm looking forward to. I enjoy these with you. They're
Yeah.
easy and fun to prepare for. I love catching up with you and talking about the trends and stuff in staffing and talent. So I just want to say thank you for joining us today, and look forward to doing it
Thank you.
again.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I hope there's not a recording of any of my predictions, because I really don't like to be accountable, so, it's much easier just to pontificate. So, but really
Yeah.
enjoyed the conversation, Andy. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mark. And thank you
Okay.
to everyone else.
Take care.
A big thank you to Mark for joining me on stage. It's always an enlightening conversation when we get together. Be sure to check out the TechServe Alliance and all the great resources they have to offer. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out the Now Hiring newsletter for more industry insights and strategies. Until next time, we are Now Hiring.